Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Down here at work. Just kind of wrapped up the day, and I kind of figured while I'm down here and I have access to my toolbox, I'm just going to go ahead and take care of the M50 manifold conversion. So right here, got the M50 manifold. Here's the original M52 manifold. And for those of you unaware of the swap, basically the OBD1 manifold, which will be used on the M50 and S50 engine, it has much larger runners or larger plenum, so a lot more airflow. The M52 has narrower plenum, which helps with low-end torque. The M50 manifold is really good for high-end power. Of course, I am going to experience a torque loss with the mod. However, that torque loss is really negligible, and the high-end power and some of the mid-range power that you pick up completely negates any potential loss that you can have. It's not a direct swap, so modifications are required. I'm going to talk about that. Did buy the M50 manifold swap kit. Comes with the adapter hose, a whole bunch of other stuff, and I also have grabbed my own hardware and things like that as well. So we're just going to kind of get right into it here and see if we can make sense of this mess. And also, just to talk about this a little bit more in depth, what makes this swap popular is, I mean, you can kind of see the difference right here, just in terms of the size of the inlet ports. There's much more air that's going to be flowed by this intake manifold. However, it's not necessarily a direct swap right off the bat, because as you can see, the M52 has this vacuum connector on the bottom, which allows you to connect your idle control valve and your oil separator. Also, you have your vacuum sources for your fuel pressure regulator and your secondary, I'm sorry, no, not your secondary, fuel pressure regulator, your the solenoid or the vacuum solenoid for your secondary air. You have your evap purge. You got a bunch of different things happening here, but basically some modifications are required here. You know, if we look at the manifold from this end, there's also a difference in terms of how the throttle body mounts up. The one area that does remain the same is we do have the brake booster vacuum nipple on it. But other than that, modifications are required to make this work. Also, the fuel rail doesn't really fit very neatly either, so we're going to have to make modifications for that. But we'll get the M52 manifold out of the way for this, and that gasket, which we no longer need. First and foremost, we have this vacuum connector right here. Unfortunately, this manifold had the locking tab broken off of it. I don't ever anticipate having to remove this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix some epoxy, and I'm going to epoxy this directly to the intake manifold. And just for reference, you can see it right there. I'm just going to run some epoxy around. It's going to be JB Weld, nothing special. I'm going to go ahead and epoxy this together, and that way I'll make sure that it never falls off, because if this were to fall off, that is going to be a gross vacuum leak. You have all sorts of run condition problems, so I don't want to deal with that. I want to make sure that it doesn't have an opportunity to come off on its own. Just going to go for the classic JB Weld, 2-part epoxy. Why not? Believe it or not, I actually think that the O-ring will hold it in place, but like I said, I really don't want this thing coming apart. Don't need that much epoxy. Just going to go ahead and mix this together thoroughly. I'm going to just run a bead around the outside of this thing to kind of make sure that it stays in place. Another aspect of this modification a lot of people really don't touch base on is the fact that the M52 fuel rail does not really seat with the M50 manifold without modification. You might have to bend the fuel rail lines here in the back of the manifold just to clear the number 6 inlet, and you're also going to have to make some modifications to the sides of these mounting posts just so that the fuel rail will want to go into place. So right now, I mean, it's close, but I can show you right here. This tab right here is kind of in the way. I don't want to get rid of the tabs, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark where I want to trim the plastic away. I'm also going to probably cut this tab off here. So I'm going to go ahead and use a Dremel. I'm going to clearance these mounting posts first, and then I'm going to cut the tab off the fuel rail, and that should give us the clearance that we need to get these to seat correctly. Alright. Just making sure that the fuel rail is fully seated, which it is. Alright. So the modification required for that is complete. So I'll just take the included fasteners here. I'll run these down. I'll get them tight, and then I'll use the OE fastener to tie the fuel rail. And I'll just use a little bit of silicone here just to help seat the injectors on these seals. If you want to replace the lower seals, you're going to have to replace the tips of the injectors. Having a moment, I can't think of the name of it, although I do know the name. I just want to make sure that these O-rings seat. That's all. So I don't need to use a ton, just a little bit. Perfect. So that's what it looks like, completely installed with the bracket adapters. So the fuel rail has no opportunity of going anywhere. And we've got plenty of clearance behind where the fuel rail will come underneath. So all in all, looking pretty decent right now. So next up, we're going to have to modify this bracket right here. This kit has adapter plates to remount this bracket. This is what the oil separator bolts to. It's going to relocate the oil separator slightly, but it'll more or less end up in the correct position. And then we have the adapter hose to tie in the idle control valve as well, which is this guy right here. So the modification I have to make to this bracket here, I need to basically cut that off, and then I need to cut this off right here. So we're going to lose essentially this component right here, or part of it, but we don't really need it. Also, this will help make room for the oil separator hose, which obviously we need to fit. I'm going to go ahead and get these adapter brackets installed. This will allow us to install this piece right here. There we go, that's how it sits. Just going to get everything loosely installed here. Tighten everything down once it's all lined up. And that's where the oil separator will sit. A little bit lower than normal, but we do have the space underneath this manifold, so not a problem. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and get our adapter, silicone hose adapter installed. I'm going to use the smallest clamp in the kit for that. Just going to push it on the barb fitting here. Slide a hose there. So now I'm going to install the oil separator for the crankcase ventilation system. It's going to go on this bracket like it would normally. Make sure you put the hose clamp on first. These are all 10 mils. Nice. All right. Next up, we need to get our idle control valve installed. We do have a support bracket. This is retained, like so. We will want to get the orientation of the idle control valve correct, and there is a flow, basically a line that says this is the direction in which the air flows in. So we have this sleeve. Just kind of slides into place. This bolts to the outside like that. Again, we'll take these M6 bolts. They'll just thread into the existing or the original OBD2 bracket. So, you know, basically bolts up like as if it were factory at this point. Tighten this down. Yeah, I mean, everything is pretty rigid in place, which is obviously the way that you'd want it. I mean, yeah, so far so good. This kit has been dead on. All the brackets are drilled in the correct position. Everything fits as it's intended. Of course, you can go ahead and put something together yourself if you want it, but I don't really see the point. The price point of this kit is not too bad. It was around 150 shipped, but I mean, everything is going together the way that it should, so it made sense to me. Next up, we have our original throttle body from the M52. One thing I think this kit does a very good job as is it includes this type of gasket right here, because on the M50 the gasket gets sandwiched up against the intake manifold. I'm sorry, on the M52 the gasket sits in here and gets sandwiched up against the intake manifold. On the M50 the gasket sits in the manifold. You know, basically this is a critical sealing point. I really wouldn't want to have to go back and forth trying to troubleshoot a vacuum leak here. So I think this kit does an excellent job making sure that you're not going to have that type of problem. And also, because I'm getting rid of ASC, I no longer need this adapter bracket, which would have been for the throttle body or the ASC throttle body. So we ditch that. Now we just install the original bolts. Like so. I didn't check. I think the original bolts are the correct length. Either way. But we'll find out here. Alright, yeah, it seems to work. Well, anyway, guys, that's how you would install the M50 Manifold Conversion Kit from M50Manifold.com. As you can see, very easy process. It does include instructions, which are extremely thorough and useful. But the kit on its own makes sense once you kind of lay out all the pieces. And if you're experienced, you'll kind of understand where everything needs to go and how to route it. Really, the only special tools you need are something to cut the original bracket from the M52 manifold, as well as shave down the mounting castles for the fuel rail. But other than that, super easy installation. Everything looks really clean, which is exactly the way that you'd want it. My only suggestion is, and also the instructions in the M50Manifold.com kit, They do recommend that you epoxy the plastic connector that sits right through there. I don't think you can see it. This guy right back here, definitely epoxy that. I would not want that to come loose because that'll be a gross vacuum leak. There's no way in hell your car will run if that's loose. So epoxy it, make sure it's permanent, it will never come out, and that would also be applicable to turbocharged or forced induction applications, supercharged as well. But other than that, any questions, comments, or concerns, leave in the comment box below. I'll link the kit in the description. As always, I really appreciate the support, guys. Getting really close to getting this car to the track. I'm hoping to do it by June. We'll see. Hopefully nothing else comes up. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys for the next one. Peace out.